Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The U.S. Security Council unanimously adopted the Anglo-American-backed resolution on transferring power to Iraqis on June the 30th. The new resolution gives legitimacy to the Iraqi interim government that will have the authority to ask occupation forces to stay or to leave Iraq. But the measure stops short of granting the Iraqis a veto over major U.S.-led military operations, as France and Germany wanted.
The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously.
Capping weeks of negotiations and revisions, the UN Security Council unanimously voted in favor of a US-British draft resolution endorsing the handover of power to Iraqis on June 30th. The 15-0 vote came after a last-minute compromise that allowed France and Germany to drop their objections to Resolution 1546, which underwent 4 revisions over 3 weeks of tough negotiations. The compromise gives Iraqi leaders control over activities of their own security forces and a say on sensitive offensive operations by the US-led occupation force. But the measure stopped short of granting the Iraqis a veto over major US-led military operations, as France and Germany proposed. Paris welcomed the resolution as an important step for Iraq.
La résolution indique.
The resolution states that the interim government and the multinational force will have to reach an agreement, but it doesn't spell out what will happen in the event of disagreement. That's why France would have preferred the text to mention that the final say in this case would fall to the Iraqi interim government, sovereign in the territory of Iraq.
For its part, Germany supported the resolution and said it was pleased that the clarifications with regard to the security partnership between the interim government and the US-led occupation were spelled out in the text. Russia said it will take quite a long time before the adoption of the document will have any impact on the ground in Iraq. US President George W. Bush welcomed the unanimous voting on the resolution, saying he supports the idea of a free society in the midst of what he called hatred and intolerance. Bush's ally and Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair called for the unification of countries previously divided by the US-led war against Iraq.
We all now want to put the divisions of the past behind us and unite behind the vision of a modern, democratic and stable Iraq that can be a force for good not just for the Iraqi people themselves, but for the whole of the region and therefore of the wider world.
Bush's second ally and Australia's Prime Minister John Howard made the alliance's objective clearer by saying that the resolution was a big step forward for Iraq's interim government and meant Iraq could now join Israel as what he called the only democratic country in the region in the development that would help broaden the appeal of democracy in the region. It seems from Howard's comments that the future of Iraq has been outlined to extract the Arab and Islamic country from its Arab and religious identity to meet the interests of Israel and US-led Western countries backing it.
Iraqi Prime Minister Ayad Allawi announced that control of Iraq's oil industry was officially handed over to the government on Tuesday. Allawi made the statement during a tour of Baghdad's Dora oil refinery, and the interim premier, meanwhile, said the departure of the US-led occupation forces depends on how much assistance Iraq receives from the international community as it seeks to recover from decades of war, dictatorship, and international sanctions. He also stressed that Iraq seeks a long-term strategic partnership with the United States. With Iraq and the Middle East issues dominating their agenda, leaders of the world's 8 most industrialized countries start their 3-day summit in Savannah in the U.S. state of Georgia. Lingering tensions over a range of issues remain a tough job as anti-war demonstrators challenge a much tightened security.
The unanimous UN Security Council vote endorsing the US-British-backed resolution on Iraq's future has given US President George W. Bush an extra boost to hold a 3-day summit of 8 world powers in Georgia. The US President badly needed the resolution to smooth tensions over Iraq and refurbish his diplomatic credentials ahead of his re-election bid in November. European Commission officials also said on the sidelines of the summit, the European Union will Wednesday lay out a blueprint for relations with Iraq in a move intended to show support for the country's fledgling government. But despite the cheery pronouncements of a squad of U.S. officials stalking summit journalists to predict a series of breakthroughs on all sorts of subjects, the talks are still full of potential pitfalls. For all the words of support for Iraqi reconstruction, neither France, nor Russia, nor Germany, nor Canada shows any sign of easing in their refusal to send soldiers to Iraq. Even if all the G8 partners support a prosperous Iraq, U.S. plans for forgiving the vast majority of Iraqi debts have run up against deep reservations from Paris and Moscow, reluctant to go so far for a country drenched in potential oil riches. Bush's so-called broader Middle East initiative for reform, once supposed to be the highlight of the summit, has also been scaled back by the United States in the face of fierce resistance from key Arab states and a tepid welcome in Europe. Washington's two major allies in the Arab world, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, refused even to attend discussions of the initiative, criticized as an attempt to impose Western values in the name of democracy. Europeans, keen to preserve their own dialogue with the Arab world, seem unwilling to go much further than an expression of support for the general principle of the battered U.S. scheme. European Commission President Romano Prodi said U.S. policy in the Middle East, particularly over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, was far from commanding unanimous support. Prodi said, quote, "The mother of all conflicts, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is still there." A Russian official said the summiteers had yet to reach agreement on at least two other major issues. Andrei Kondakov, head of economic relations at the Russian Foreign Ministry, said questions remained about measures to prevent the spread of nuclear arms and to revive the Doha round of global trade talks. U.S. officials said 7 new countries would join the world leaders at the Group of 8 summit to seek to boost efforts to curb the spread of nuclear weapons as part of the so-called global war on terrorism. However, U.S. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control John Bolton said on the sidelines of the summit, the United States, which has said oil-rich Iran has no legitimate use for a civilian nuclear program, would not raise the same objections in a transformed Iraq.
At least 12 members of an Iraqi security force were killed and 10 wounded when a mortar attack hit forces loyal to an Iraqi general charged with imposing security in Fallujah. The attack was believed to be the first time General Muhammad Latif's Fallujah brigade had come under first fire since it set out to impose security in Fallujah last month following fierce fighting between U.S. troops and insurgents. Fiercely anti-American Fallujah has been relatively calm. Latif and others, former Iraqi generals, offered to help U.S. troops restore calm in the town. Witnesses said that Iraqi police and security forces boosted their presence in Fallujah following the attack. A medical official told Reuters that 6 dead had been taken to his hospital. In Baghdad, Iraqi insurgents attacked a convoy of trucks carrying food supplies to the U.S. forces near the airport, burning a vehicle and injuring 1 person. Meanwhile, a pipeline carrying oil from Iraq's Kirkuk fields to the country's biggest refinery was attacked and set ablaze. An oil ministry spokesman said the pipeline was not connected to Iraq's vital oil export link to Turkey, which is already out of action following previous attacks. He said the fire was under control and said the flow from the oil fields to the refinery was likely to resume in about 4 to 5 days. After nearly 2 months in captivity, the 3 Italian hostages freed from their Iraqi kidnappers by U.S.-led coalition forces returned home. Italy said no deal had been cut with the hostage takers. The 3 were working in Iraq for a U.S. security firm and were kidnapped on April 12 as a wave of abductions swept Iraq. The release of the hostages sparked relief and joy across Italy's political spectrum, but some in the opposition noted that it came at a convenient time for the government as it may temper bad feeling over the presence of Italian troops in Iraq. Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi said the safe release of the 3 hostages was proof his government's policies in Iraq were working. A controversial report claiming American administration policy gave the president the power to allow American interrogators to torture Iraqi suspects caused commotion in Congress as the Senate Judiciary Committee grilled Attorney General John Ashcroft about Iraqi prisoners' abuse. Ashcroft refused to give details of the paper but insisted President George W. Bush has not given any orders that would violate the Constitution, U.S. laws, or international treaties. That prompted sharp questioning from committee member Senator Joe Biden of Delaware.
Well, my time's up, I can see.
I condemn torture. I think
So it's not justified then?
I don't think it's productive, let alone justified.
Well, I don't either. And by the way, there's a reason, I'll conclude by saying there's a reason why we sign these treaties. To protect my son in the military. That's why we have these treaties. So when Americans are captured, they are not tortured. That's the reason. In case anybody forgets it. That's the reason.
Well, as a person whose son is in the military now on active duty and has been in the Gulf within the last several months, I'm aware of those considerations.
Israel shelled the Lebanese side of the border at Sidana Hills and Birk Shibha amid high tensions following Israeli airstrikes and Hezbollah attacks across the UN demarcated blue line along the volatile frontier. Lebanon filed a letter of complaint with the United Nations Security Council over an Israeli airstrike near Beirut, calling the raid a dangerous aggression. Beirut said it was reserved the right to request a Security Council meeting. UN spokesman Fred Urquhart urged restraint. Mohalef Fakih has a story.
Hezbollah attacked Israeli positions in the occupied Sheba Farms area on Tuesday, one day after Israeli warplanes raided what Israel described as a Palestinian base near Beirut. Israeli military sources in Jerusalem said an Israeli soldier was likely wounded. Residents in Kafar Shuba village on Lebanon's border with Israel said Israel responded with artillery fire on nearby villages. Israeli warplanes also flew over the area and were fired on by Hezbollah using shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft missiles. Hezbollah said it was retaliating for an Israeli attack deep inside Lebanese soil on Monday, itself a response to rocket fire at an Israeli Navy ship in the Mediterranean earlier that day. Suspicion fell on Palestinian groups rather than Hezbollah, which has limited its cross-border attacks to the Sheba Farms. Despite the violence, the head of Israel's Northern Command said Israel did not want a flare-up. Hezbollah, which controls the area joining Lebanon's border with Israel, says Sheba Farms is occupied Lebanese territory, and the United Nations describe it as Israeli-occupied Syrian land. Monday's Israel air raid on the village of Nami, 20 kilometers of the Lebanese capital, was the closest raid to Beirut since Israeli troops withdrew from southern Lebanon after 22 years of occupation in May 2000. Security sources said the Nami was used by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. The group said the base was used as a medical clinic. Israel said the air attack was a signal to Lebanon and Syria that Beirut cannot be used as a launchpad for attacks on Israel. Lebanon complained about the air raid to the UN Security Council. The United Nations had called on both Lebanon and Israel to try to prevent violence, warning the incidents were serious and worrisome. The U.S. State Department said it had been in contact with the governments of Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. It urged maximum restraint and made the point that it's in the interest of all parties to maintain calm. In New York, Israel's United Nations mission filed a letter of complaint with the world body against what it described as Lebanese violations of the border and what it said were Lebanon's breach of Security Council resolutions. Israeli diplomats said if Lebanon brought the complaint to the Security Council, Israel would also bring, quote, Hezbollah violations to the Council.
The Palestinian Legislative Council conducted a heated session on the Egyptian cement scandal. Private Palestinian companies imported the cement under the umbrella of senior officials in the Palestinian Authority. The issue is being presented to the Attorney General for review after the Council's Parliamentary Committee discovered that large amounts of cement have been imported at a cheaper rate and sold for profit to Israeli contractors using it to build the separating wall. Amidst feelings of embarrassment and condemnation, the Palestinian Legislative Council convened in Ramallah and Gaza to discuss the Egyptian cement scandal. A number of Palestinian officials and private companies are behind the scandal. The issue is being presented to the Attorney General to review the case. The scandal overshadowed the Legislative Council's working agenda. Council members exchanged accusations with the government for issuing import permits without monitoring the process, thus leading the importers, who brought the cement from Egypt at a very low price, to sell it to Israeli contractors using it to build the separating wall.
The Council drew on what was published in the Egyptian press, reporting that Egyptian cement is used to build the separating wall. The Council expressed concerns over the matter, however they have not confirmed it. We have a document from the highest monitoring agency of the Palestinian National Authority from Mr. Jalal Qudwe, stating that in effect a large amount of cement has been used to build the foundations for the apartheid wall.
Amidst the verbal exchange, many members called for a no-confidence vote for the government, since a number of government officials are accused of being part of this scandal, especially after the leadership of the Legislative Council is purposely ignoring this demand.
The reason for objecting to it, and my personal objection, is first that I was going to ask for a vote of no confidence of the ministry. This matter has been ongoing for several months, and the head of the government has not taken any measures against the accused ministers.
According to analysts, taking the Egyptian cement scandal to the Attorney General is the beginning of the end of this issue, without holding the people behind it accountable, thus reminding us of similar cases that remained in the file cabinets of the investigative committees assigned to look into them. During the past years of the Intifada, the Palestinians have been preoccupied with the political and security situation caused by the occupation. However, this does not suggest that they are not concerned with internal politics. Nevertheless, corruption scandals which have been concerning the Palestinians for a long time. Majid Saeed, Dhabi TV, in front of the Legislative Council's building, Ramallah.
Amid occupation, the Kurdish threat to withdraw from the government, security threats, and worries of not gaining complete sovereignty, ordinary Iraqis are anticipating what may happen after June 30th.
Amid those who are trying to publicize that peace will prevail in the new Iraq after June 30th, a new beginning to another chapter is taking place in Iraq. This chapter is threatened by political and security problems, both at the internal and international levels, and it may be condemned to an endless cycle of optimism and pessimism. It appears that some Iraqis are interested and others are not.
The largest segment of the Iraqi population does not care about what's happening because they are not interested in the political process to begin with. They view themselves outside this political process because it has been conducted outside their control.
In the eyes of those who are interested, occupation, unity, and sovereignty are the titles of the new chapter.
Actually, it complies with what the Iraqi people had envisioned. We always called for unity and sovereignty and ending the occupation of Iraq.
Those who are optimistic sum up these titles and add certainty.
God willing, we are optimistic that we will have sovereignty sooner or later.
Amid the ghosts of Saddam, which still can be seen, and the historic dream of the Iraqi Kurds who are threatening to withdraw from the new interim government if their dream is not going to be achieved in what they see as the last chance, we found more worries and opinions.
I'm optimistic about the future of Iraq, God willing, because the ones who are taking the leadership of Iraq are aware of the injustices that the Iraqi people had to endure at the hands of Saddam Hussein.
Thus, I'm an Iraqi who chooses justice and stability. I choose the unity of Iraq, and I choose the prosperous future to my children. The future is like the hands of a clock. It doesn't go backward. However, based on the present, one can make predictions. The question is, what will happen after June 30th?
What do we see after June 30th? I have predictions that may not be pleasing. I predict that violence will increase because the government that was appointed did not get the support of different groups of the Iraqi population.
In the Moroccan capital of Rabat, academics and activists participated in a meeting that was organized by the Moroccan EBAC organization to discuss the United States Greater Middle East Initiative. The initiative received great opposition, especially amid what is happening in Iraq. The report of Mohammed Saad.
The Moroccan nucleus of opposition to the American Greater Middle East Initiative is forming. In the headquarters of the Lawyers Union in Rabat, university activists participated in a meeting that was organized by the Moroccan APAC organization to express their rejection to the American initiative, which calls for democratization of the region. It was born in Washington in the wake of the war in Iraq.
We are participating in this meeting because it includes the people who are not consulted or asked about their opinion, while America is suggesting that the industrialized nations of the G8 participate in its Greater Middle East Initiative.
No one knows the hidden agenda behind the American strategy. The United States claims that it will achieve a leap in promoting democracy, but the killing of civilians, children and women in Iraq and Palestine contradicts this claim. Thus, there is a natural tendency in the entire region to oppose this initiative.
The opposition front is acting by collecting signatures of people opposing the American project. This front is also forming a bridge with an international movement which links its rejection to the American initiative with its opposition to globalization and liberalization.
We do not have an alternative initiatives to replace the American Greater Middle East project because we are not organized enough. However, we presented alternative initiatives to the brutal globalization and liberalization through the Bombay and the Porto Alegre summits. We protest and we also present alternatives.
In the current situation, the anti-globalization movement concentrated on demanding peace, just like what happened in Italy when it was visited by the American President George Bush. Originally, this movement was established by popular demands to stop the effects of globalization and the inequalities that result from it. Naturally, the movement was influenced by the war that was imposed on the world, which forced it to change its strategy.
Al Arabiya has obtained a copy of the latest draft of a reform plan requested by the United States called the Greater Middle East Initiative. It includes all countries from Bangladesh in the east to Morocco in the west. This proposal will be discussed by the regional states at the G8 Industrial Nations Summit that will be held in this month in the United States. The reforms were placed on the detailed program, beginning with changes at the ministerial level for political, economical, and social reforms, ending with encouraging translation, publication, and including computers in schools. In addition, it suggests providing assistance and financing activities that support democracy, human rights, media, and women. The state that agrees to such reforms will receive support. However, those that oppose will face obstacles that have not been defined. Meanwhile, it is known that Egypt and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will not be attending the summit. Those participating are Jordan, Algeria, Bahrain, and Yemen. This report sheds light on what is included in the final draft of this initiative. The Al-Arabiya TV has obtained a copy of the official draft of the G8 summit, containing issues that the leaders of the industrial states will discuss along with 4 participating Arab countries to clarify the new challenges of the Greater Middle East Initiative. The draft proposal includes 23 recommendations divided into 4 parts or major themes. They are economic and financial reforms, political reforms, educational reforms, and finally, judicial reforms. Also, assistance and financial aid for activities related to democracy, human rights, media, women, and civic organizations. To implement these reforms on the ground, the proposal suggests establishing a future committee that will be represented at the foreign ministerial level, focusing on the economic and social issues by both the industrial nations and the nations mentioned in the plan. Despite the importance of the economic reforms in the plan, it focuses on eliminating bribery and corruption and enforcing transparency in financing and implementing development projects, holding the government accountable for the results of the projects they do, and fighting money laundering and the financing of terrorism. Politically, the plan calls for giving more effective roles for civic society and various organizations in the fields of freedom of expression and human rights, union workers, and independent media. In addition, encouraging efforts toward achieving free and fair elections and encouraging women to assimilate and participate in the political process and enabling them to become candidates in policy-making positions. On education, the plan proposes another aim, to establish an information-based society. Further, it suggests reforming schools' curriculums, as well as making it easier to publish books, classical and literary references, expanding translations, publications, and distributions. Training 100,000 teachers by 2009, with the objective of decreasing literacy and increasing the access of girls and women to education. Meanwhile, a number of Arab and Islamic countries have reservations about these reforms, if they are in opposition to the values, customs, and traditions of their society. They demand more coordination in the process of democratization and modernization. On the judicial reforms, the plans call for independent judiciary. It also suggests training judges, lawyers, and law students, and establishing offices for judicial supervision for understanding civil law, criminal law, and Sharia Islamic laws. The draft proposal indicated the desire of the industrial nations to rid countries of their problems that impedes reforms to achieve the Greater Middle East Initiative, designed for countries expanding from Bangladesh in the east to Morocco in the west. They protected the draft proposal, which will be submitted at the summit, by confirming that participation is optional and that the suggested reforms are up to the governments in the region to implement. They offered to give much support to countries that choose to participate in the initiative, just as they hinted using force against those who rejected the proposal by denying them assistance in the project called the Finance Fund. This project aims at gathering financial organizations and directing them to fund the desired strategic reforms. The Arab states invited to the G8 summit are Yemen, Algeria, Jordan, Bahrain, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. The Kingdom and Egypt confirmed that they declined attending the summit because of other commitments. However, under the shadow of instability due to the Arab-Israeli conflict and the situation in Iraq, the Arab states say that there are reasonable obstacles that impede implementing these reforms.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.